Great. All right. So we're going to go with the Pledge of Allegiance to get things going. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
liberty and justice for all.
All right, so just we'll go quick introductions here. Brian Hodson, Mayor of Canby, and your illustrious co-chair for C4 here. I'm glad to be here on a really sunny evening and a Blazer playoff game. So, hey, you know, these are the sacrifices we make to do the fine work that we do. We're gonna go, I'll just go right around my screen. Hopefully not shift too much for me, but Sean, Mr. Drinkwine.
Sean Drinkwine, Mayor of Estacada.
Perfect, welcome. Mr. Cook.
Rick Cook, Hamlet Rep.
Excellent, thank you, sir. Mr. Myers.
CPO Rep. I'm also with Redland, Biola, Fishers Mill, CPO.
Mr. Gornick.
Paul Gornick from Oak Lodge Water Services, representing sanitary districts.
Perfect. Councilor Sherman.
Brett Sherman, City Councilor, City of Happy Valley.
John Mackler.
Good evening, John Mackler, Region 1 of Oregon Department of Transportation.
Thank you for being here, sir. Ms. Pratt.
Pratt, Tualatin City Council.
The infamous Mr. Gronke.
Ed Gronke, just a plain citizen from Clackamas County, representing us on MPAC.
Humble as always, Ed, thanks. Mr. Commissioner Savas.
Hello, everyone. Paul Savas, Clackamas County Commissioner, your other co-chair for C4. Oh, by the way, do or die tonight for the Blazers, by the way.
And again, we are here doing the necessary work that needs to be done.
How dedicated we all are. Thank you all.
I should ask, like, by a show of hands, how many have another screen open watching the Blazer game as the meeting's going on? So, Tammy, did you raise your hand saying that? Okay. All right. So, is anyone recording the game to watch after this? All right, Tammy, you need to give us periodic updates on what's going on. Ms. Christopherson.
Hi, Teresa Christopherson, Clackamas County Social Services, here representing rural transit providers.
Great, thank you. Mayor Stemple.
Tammy Stemple, Mayor Gladstone. I'm trying to fix my phone so it won't be distracting while I'm watching the game.
Commissioner Heisey.
Kathy Heisey, Council President, City of Milwaukee.
Mayor Smith.
Hi, I'm Rachel Lyle Smith, Mayor of Oregon City.
Thank you. Mr. Brashears.
Hey, good evening. Dwight Brashear. I am the Transit Director for SMART, and I represent urban transit providers.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ford.
Chris Ford, Oregon Department of Transportation, Region 1, along with John Mackler.
Great. And Commissioner Lewis.
Hi, Christine Lewis. I serve on Metro Council representing District 2.
Wonderful. And last but not least, our tour guide for the evening, Mr. Trent Wilson.
Thank you very much. Trent Wilson, your C4 staff. And I will just quickly walk through the attendee list for the record. We have Christina Babcock from County Transit staff. We have Chris Lyons from County Government Affairs staff. We have Dana Webb from Oregon City staff. Jamie Huff from Happy Valley. Mark Stewart, also a CPO alternate. Mark Ottenden from City of Wilsonville Smart. Mr. Seth Brumley from ODOT. Please let me know, John and Chris, if he needs to come over to help with the presentation. Seeing the head shake. Jamie Stasny from County Transportation staff, and Mr. Tom Markgraf, who is our urban transit alternate and TriMet staff. If you could help us too, we've had a request by some of the folks in previous attendee meetings, if you could add to your name on the screen who you represent, if it doesn't already say that. So for example, Mayor Drinkwine says Mayor Drinkwine, Estacada. that would help some of the attendees know and some of our guests know who you are during the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Next up is for housekeeping is approval of the May 6th, 2021 C4 minutes.
And if you would indulge me, if you would indulge me to jump in front of you, there is a typo in one of the comments there for a name. It says Kay Dunsmuir instead of Katie Dunsmuir. That's counselor in Estacada. So I just want to make sure that that's corrected for the record. That outreach has happened already from the city of Estacada. I want to make sure that's honored here.
Trent, I actually had a second one because I believe Martine Koblenz's name is not Martin.
That's correct, and I'm glad she hasn't noticed that, and I'll fix that.
Great.
Right, so minutes with some corrections. Is there a motion to approve with said corrections?
So moved.
There we go. I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded. With a show of hands on your screen, all those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? It carries. Thank you all very much. We're going to move into the 2024-27 State Transportation Improvement Plan update. And I think that's Mr. Mackler and his group there is going to take us through that. The floor is yours, sir.
All right. Can you all see the screen? Did I share it successfully?
Yes,
terrific. Then away we go. My name is John Mackler. I am the planning manager for ODOT in Region 1. You'll be hearing from me today and my boss, Chris Ford, who is the policy and development manager for Region 1. And we have a desire to bring you up to speed on what's happening with what we call the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a background at the beginning. My goal is just to make sure that all of you are comfortable with the basic concept of what the STIP is and what we're doing, and to highlight sort of what the upcoming steps are. And then Chris is going to take it to talk about a specific program around something that's called the Enhanced Highway Program. That's going to be of particular interest to local agencies around the region. So just some basic learning objectives for you tonight. We expect to just talk for a few minutes, and then as Trent has advised us, we'll have plenty of time for you to have discussion among yourselves, or if you have questions that you'd like to ask us while you have us available. So here we go. We're talking about the 24-27 STIP. I'm going to cover the timeline for developing the STIP, the summary of funding programs that are statewide funding programs that make up the STIP, and then an overview of something that we call scoping. If you'll pardon me just 5 seconds, then you won't have to listen to my kids quite as much. Be right with you. These are just the wonderful things. The dog didn't bark though, so there's that. All right, thanks for obliging me. Okay, the STIP is a 4-year capital program for federal transportation funds. It's a rolling document, so we're talking about the 24-27 STIP. It covers federal fiscal years, 24 through 27. And if you're not up on this one, your pub quiz for the night is that federal fiscal years start on October 1st. All right, ODOT develops a STIP every 3 years, which you might think is a strange thing for a 4-year capital program. So this handy little infographic below shows you that that red star is where we are right now, sort of towards the end of federal fiscal year 21. We have just commenced implementing the 21-24 STIP, which is probably the last time you saw me was back in 2018 to talk to you about developing the 21-24 STIP. So as we are out there implementing the 21-24 STIP, we are developing the projects that will make up the 24-27 STIP. And they have this overlapping year. So effectively, federal fiscal year 24 is already programmed. So what we have to work with is 3 new years worth of money, which is federal fiscal years 25, 26, and 27. So that's some jargony, wonky stuff that you can remember if you want, but please just take away that the federal fiscal year starts on October 1st. That'll be on the quiz. Okay, the timeline for developing this particular cycle of the STIP. back in January of 21, the Oregon Transportation Commission, I'm sorry I didn't spell that out here, OTC is the Oregon Transportation Commission, made what they call the funding allocation decision. And I'll have some slides on that for you in just a second. That's where they set aside the money for the different programs. And here we are on the timeline back at the very beginning of federal fiscal year 21, working on that allocation decision. In the summer and fall of 21, the regions help statewide program managers by estimating the costs and the risks associated with each project. So we'll get into the programs, but say, for example, there's a manager of all the bridges in the state. They say, I think this is a bridge we're going to want to do a project on. We think it's going to cost X dollars, but you technical folks in the regions, please go figure out what it would actually cost to do. And that's what we are in the middle of doing right now. As shown in the graphic here, the calendar year of 21 is really spent scoping. As we get into federal fiscal year of 22, which again starts in the fall, we take all of that data about what the projects will actually cost, and kind of like many of you in your cities and in the county develop capital investment plans, we will begin programming those projects to figure out all the different colors of money and the timing of, we want to avoid things like putting construction on 2 parallel routes at the same time. So you've got financial questions and you also have some construction reality questions in order to come up with that final 3-year program. It will be July of 2023 when the Oregon Transportation Commission finally adopts the STIP following a process of public involvement where they come around and share as much information as they can with our local stakeholders. Okay, I mentioned funding programs. So what the OTC did in finishing in January of this year was allocating $2.1 billion statewide for the 24-27 STIP. So again, that represents 3 years of money. By comparison, the 21-24 STIP was just a little bit bigger of $2.4 billion. These are federal tax dollars. So this is when you go to the pump and you put in a gallon of gas, some of that tax goes to the state and some of it goes to the federal government. These are the federal tax dollars. The individual programs that make up the 2.1 billion, the big category that we look at is fix it. This is where we fix our pavements, our culverts, our bridges, and other assets out there in the infrastructure. There are other categories. Chris is going to be talking to you in a minute about the enhanced highway program. We have safety programs, local programs, which are the kinds of grants that local jurisdictions apply for to do a whole variety of different programs. Those funds are administered by the state. We have a large pot of money allocated to fixing our ADA compliance, making sure there are curb ramps out everywhere. And then everybody's got to have a miscellaneous category, the $161.4 million that covers a lot of small programs that serve different needs around the state. So you can see how you get to $2.1 billion. The scoping process that we're undertaking in this calendar year, as I said, the managers of programs like the Bridge program send us lists of projects. We are working throughout the year to investigate those projects. We often work with your technical staffs if we're coming to investigate a project to make sure, for example, the one I like to use, if we're going to replace a traffic signal pole and you know that you're going to be coming through on the intersecting street and say widening the sidewalk or adding a stormwater feature, we want to make sure that we plant that new signal pole where you want it to go, cognizant of your local plans. So it works for us and it works for you rather than making a very costly mistake. So we coordinate closely with your staff in those situations. We started this process just last month. It will last throughout 2021. And what your staff in particular are interested in is a website that we're going to be launching this month, where we'll post all the lists of those projects that we're working on. And that's where you'll find out where we're coming, what kinds of projects might be coming to your communities, and where you might want to participate with us in this scoping process. So that's the end of my half of the show. And I think I'll just pass it to Chris now. Chris, I'll click the slides for you when you cue me. And I think we'll take questions at the end.
All right, thank you so much, John. This is a tough act to follow. So as you saw, one of the categories is called Enhance. This every STIP cycle, the Oregon Transportation Commission does adjust what the categories are, what they're called, what they mean, and so sometimes names carry over and exactly what they do changes. And this is one of the instances that we're dealing with right now. If you could move it forward, John. So I'll give you an overview here of what the program is, what we're proposing in Region 1, some of the concepts we're considering, and then we can have a conversation and let you get into a discussion as well. And so if you move on. So this is a different version of what John showed you earlier. And if you recall, there was a different number in italics on the version you saw before. Enhanced Highway said 175 million before. Well, 110 million of that actually is money going towards HB 2017 projects. So the amount of enhanced highway money statewide is $65 million. That is for the entire state of Oregon in that STIP cycle. As you may have noticed, there are a lot more dollars in the current STIP cycle, and there's actually just a lot more money in the overall STIP cycle from before. So things change from time to time. Really important thing is no matter what money we're talking about here, we are well aware that this is a fraction of the money that is needed to address deficiencies and needs and desires, maybe 10% of ultimately what is needed. Move on, John. So I want to note this is schedule. You'll see the schedule slide again at the end. But what we are right now is at the very beginning of this. You are actually our very first audience for this presentation. Trent can affirm that I finished it about 2 hours ago. So yeah, I know. Thank you for your patience, Trent. Ultimately, we're in the start of a summer-long roadshow where we go and speak with coordinating committees, TACs, ACs, MPOs about this program. And ultimately, the ODOT regions, there's 5 regions, will be submitting proposals to a project oversight committee that will then generate a draft project list, like a 125% list that will then get scoped. And we will come back in later this year, beginning of 2022, to say, hey, this seems to be what we learned. And so there's opportunities for comment input along the way. So if you're like, hey, we feel like we've kind of missed the train, this is new, you are actually at the very beginning of it all. John? So what the program is intended to be, as defined by the OTC, is it is for highway operational enhancements. That is on the state highway system. It is not for local systems. 30% is supposed to be dedicated to, the term being used as rural areas. That means outside of MPOs. So that don't overtake the term rural, but of course, much of your county is then by this definition within the area. Projects are supposed to improve congestion or freight conditions, and then effectively they're seen positively if they can benefit one of those other outcomes listed there: safety, accessibility, equity, or climate. Also, if there are matching funds of some kind, that could be an advantage, and those could be of many sources. So what it is, though, it is a statewide discretionary program, and it is a competitive program to which ultimately projects will be selected from across the entire state. Next. So our proposed strategy within Region 1 is to identify about half of that $65 million in investments. We know that everything won't be selected. We're already looking throughout the region. We're definitely including rural projects, and we're making sure that everything basically checks the boxes. And project costs and readiness are really important, especially in terms of readiness. So I think planning projects do qualify, but ultimately everything really is meant to move forward congestion, freight, or both in the near term. Next. So what I'm going to go through now is, and for those of you who attend or otherwise watch the Area Committee on Transportation, we have an ACT meeting on Monday, and still working in the materials up. A version of this presentation I will share at that meeting. And we'll go through a longer list here, or at the ACT, but what I'm going to do here is focus on the initial kind of draft list of projects that Region 1 staff have come up with for presentation and discussion. And some of these are regional in nature. I'll go through those. And then I'll go through Clackamas County specific projects, and then we'll stop there. I'll kind of recap the schedule and let's have a discussion. But at the ACT, we'll go through the ones that are also located in other parts of Region 1. So some of the concepts that we have for consideration throughout the region is along I-5, throughout the whole corridor going all the way between the Boone and Markham Bridge, is a bunch of active traffic management or ITS systems projects that would work on handling areas where there's lots of, you could call it bottlenecks, but to address crashes, congestion conditions, we would focus on sites where there are our SPIS data say that there's active safety problems. And the goal of this is to improve safety, reduce crashes, manage congestion, improve reliability. And so there's a series of project options throughout that. So that's one option to consider. John, next. And then this map shows other parts of the region where there are other ATM, active traffic management opportunities. You see some are on 205, there's some in areas of the region. Same issue, different areas. And you can see kind of the price tag on some of them. So we think that these offer pretty good bang for the buck, especially when you get to federal money, which is not always, as some of you know, the most efficient way to deliver projects. Next. And then Region 1 staff have initially identified these 4 projects within Clackamas County. I'll go through them overall here, and then we have a slide for the first 3 of them, and then we can talk. But as I go through these, what we're coming out to you with is to share and show you what we're thinking of in terms of this competitive enhanced program, and to see if you feel like you have any input on these particular projects, and if you have any higher priority projects than these that you think would qualify. So one of those is the Northbound Auxiliary Lane Extension at Charbonneau. So that is considered a rural project. It's outside the Metro MPO, and there's a picture of it there. And it would basically be a matter of kind of combining those 2 very close together on-ramps. Yes, thank you. Exactly. That would improve safety, freight mobility, and congestion altogether. So that would be one option. Another rural project would be the 26 Timberline Road intersection up on Mount Hood. We have a really wide shoulder there, especially in winter time. A lot of people think of it as an additional lane. Part of the issue is actually the way that the Timberline Highway intersects with US 26, but we basically want to improve safety and clarity up there. $2 million for that one. Highway 224, this is between 205 and Rusk Road, and it would be to add an additional 3rd lane or right turn lane. And this is the one of these projects that is not a rural project, but is instead within the Metro MPO boundary. And as you see, it does have a higher dollar sign. And then there's also a project that involves rest area development and advanced investigations. This would be a planning project. This is up at Government Camp, where there is a rest area that actually generates a lot of safety concerns about where it is in terms of on US 26, in terms of cars, people trying to cross the highway. And there's also some development opportunities that could be brought about if that was better located. John, you can go to the next slide. So this talks in more detail about the Charbonneau Auxiliary Lane. We can come back to these. Next one, 224 westbound 3rd lane, and more about 26 Timberline Road. So I just want to make sure that we have plenty of time for conversation and input. So again, back to the schedule. We're at the very beginning. Look, time frame June. It's June 3rd of coming in and speaking with the ACT and other coordinating committees. And so there's a lot of time. We can have conversations over email here at this forum. We can come back at other times. And so the goal is we're going to present at the June ACT on Monday. And then the next ACT meeting is in August. We'll come back there with an updated list of projects for more input from the ACT. And if there is an interest in us coming back to C4, if there's time, even just to kind of present materials, we're happy to do that. So I will wrap up at this point and allow for some conversation and questions about both the STIP overall as well as the enhanced program.
Thank you both for that. I appreciate that. It's a big overview. There's definitely a lot coming regarding that piece of it. So are there any questions? If you want to throw your hand up in the panelist participation window, and we can run down those hands and answer any questions.
And Trent does have a copy of this that he will provide afterwards. I'm sorry we didn't get you this ahead of time.
Oh, that'll be helpful. So great, thank you. No questions. We're totally jazzed. Aha, Councilor Sherman. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Kind of just a general question. So, some of the programs like Fix It are, the way a project gets elevated may be based on like ODOT data versus like competitive grants. Is there any tool that we have or a way that we can differentiate between those, like which projects are ODOT data related versus other decision-making processes? Is there like a map or a tool that we have access to?
So I'll start this and then John will clean this up. That is a great question. That's pro level. You're good. Most of them are data generated, like bridges, culverts, paving, like preservation. And so when we get our website up, which I think will be probably by the end of next week, it will go through and describe the way that all of the programs are. That's really the first set of information will be on there, defining like how the projects come about. So I think that will be a great resource. So we'll make sure you have a copy of that. And John, do you have more to add to that?
I think I'd ask a clarifying question. It sort of depends on how deep you want to go. If you want to see a map of all the projects and you want to know which ones belong to which programs, that's an easy yes. If you wanted to go deeper and see a map with like culvert ratings, that's possible. It's a much more in-depth question.
Yeah, I think it's really probably kind of more the latter. It's knowing which type of project they are, but then also knowing kind of why some get elevated more versus others. So that really, I mean, it's not me. I'm not the smart guy. It's staff with the smart people.
Yep.
It's helping them to kind of quantify how these pieces fit together.
I think that's something. What I have found in my experience at ODOT is my most successful relationships with, say, your city staff is when we scope a project. Like if we're looking at an intersection in Happy Valley, so we're looking at something on 212 or 224, and they want to understand how an investigation of a certain signal made it sort of to the first cut, but then got dropped before the second cut. I've just had a good time. I mean, it's always felt productive to me to sit down. I can go over the scoping notes and explain what attributes did we find. We thought it was going to cost $1 million, and we found out that because of an ADA issue or a stormwater issue or a right-of-way issue, it ended up costing $2.5 million. And that particular program maybe has a cost-benefit ratio. So that's such a case-by-case kind of thing that I find that a one-to-one contact, if there's ever, that's a customer service that I'd like to be able to provide to your staff if they have questions about why a project did or didn't make it.
I mean, that sounds great. I really appreciate that, having you as a resource, and I'm sure we will reach out on many topics. So thank you very much for the response.
Happy to.
And just a note on that, when you have the presentation from Trent, we can put it on the screen. John and I's emails are at the end of the presentation, the last slide too.
Councilor Heisey.
It's not a lack of interest. It's just I am still reading through my notes from your presentation. That was a good brain dump. And since Councilor Sherman opened up asking about something that had to do with the earlier part, I feel freed to follow suit. On the ADA money, and I might have been writing and missed something, do you have any particular criteria for how you're going to prioritize ADA improvements at certain intersections, or how is that going to play out?
It's a great question. I'll answer it to the best of my ability, but it's a really specialized niche for ODOT right now. I'd be happy to help you connect with the ADA program manager in Salem to get more information. In short, ODOT entered into a legal settlement with a plaintiff that led to a commitment by the state, a requirement on the state to remedy 100% of our ADA ramps, our curb cuts, or potential ADA ramps throughout the state. And I think the total number is 33,000 individual curb ramps. So we have until 2032 to achieve that measure of 100%. And so the state has developed a strategy that's primarily aimed at achieving that outcome in the most cost-effective manner. And in general, the rule has been, we'll get to Region 1 last. That they're working on parts of the state where the cases are simpler. And we are working not only on design and construction, but delivery techniques that we hope will bring our kind of per ramp cost down. So that's very generally how we're prioritizing on a cost effectiveness basis. And so in general, ODOT has not come to Region 1 for very much ADA mitigation yet. Once we get to the region, I don't have enough information myself right now to tell you how we're going to prioritize between certain ramps and others. I know that we have looked at in the scoping process opportunities. If we're out there, say paving, 99E in Milwaukee, we're not going to pave that without getting to those ADA ramps. So we're looking at where other projects are coming to align the ADA financial resources with those projects. So that's sort of the best, that's the best that I can offer from the information I have.
I don't have a lot more. There is a monthly meeting that we have within Region 1 to identify the obstacles, and a current near-term one, kind of with all the exciting things happening in real estate, is one of the challenges is when ADA ramps require purchase of right-of-way, and the process of getting the land assessed, there is a shortage of property assessors. This affects everyone, including your friendly Department of Transportation. So we're, I think, in the near term, trying to find those opportunities also where there's not a right-of-way purchase required. So that's kind of a short-term inside thing, which it kind of gets to some of the reality about trying to implement this.
Thanks.
That's some serious inside baseball, Mr. Ford.
It's also reality. I mean, any of you who work on building stuff right now probably know that this is very real.
Definitely is. All right, anything else for our presenters from, yes, Mr. Myers, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions while I have a chance. Besides the not wanting to get into the real estate aspect of things, are there other limitations or accepted parameters that we should be keeping in mind? I'm thinking mostly about the rural money. Then I'd like to maybe turn to C4 and ask the group generally whether, I know that we're looking at Abernathy Bridge and funding from that under other sources, but I'm not sure any of us are at all comfortable with the idea of what money and how it's going to be placed to diversion, to avoid diversion. And I'm wondering whether or not this is something that would be right for that category. Thanks.
I'm not aware of any further definition beyond what you see there. It's in some ways, that really limits, but there's not a lot of, it's not a complex process. Ultimately, there is, I've seen a very simple form for Region 1, 2, 3, 4 staff to fill out. It's sort of like, what's the name of it? Where is it? How much do you think it would cost? Does it address congestion or freight or both? And then how does it fit across those 4 categories? And it's kind of a written document, so make some attachments. So I think making a good case about the issue, a clear business case, and having some certainty around cost and outcomes always benefits any kind of project in a kind of a pre-scoping situation like this. So that's the only recommendation I have. I think that we would look to the thoughts of an organization like yours to say, yeah, what feel like your local priorities? This is why we are here, because we can see what we see from our, I would say, office or bedroom, as it turns out. But you're the experts.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. This has come up recently, and I haven't had a chance to ask the question. I thought maybe our folks here would appreciate, hearing your response. But the questions come: what are we going to do with the tunnel near the Willamette Falls site on 99E? And I say that with an added element, knowing that currently the tolling study that's being done for I-205 in the region is not including 99E in that diversion aspect. So my concern, I think the concern from others, is if diversion indeed is not being covered, that really means that it's probably going to see some significant impacts. And I think that's probably one of the most dangerous areas of 99E between I-5 and Multnomah County line along 99E. But I just want to know if you've ever thought or priced or what that solution would be for that tunnel, irregardless of diversion. It's always been a big issue, especially the turning radius and knowing that trucks will divert as well.
I do not even know how to begin to answer that, so I'm going to look to Mr. Mackler.
I've heard a lot of conversations about the tunnel, but none in the space of you know, a reconstruction or a modernization of the tunnel, always maintenance or, you know, small nibbling around the edges, if you will. I think what we can do is we can check with some of our asset management folks to understand how they look at it. I think we could look into some of the data to support the suggestion you've made that there are some safety risks associated with the geometry there.
Yeah, great. I just want to, you know, our county staff, I think, have flagged that when our comments on the NEPA process. It just seems to me that that is pretty fundamental, and it ought to be, it should have been or ought to be included in that diversion study. And if not, then I think ODOT should press hard on looking for a solution because I think I don't know if anyone's been through that tunnel when a truck goes underneath it, but people get pinched. It's not pretty, extremely dangerous. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Commissioner, for adding that to the conversation, because it is a severe pinch point for sure. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. Mr. Mackler, Mr. Ford, thank you very much for being here this evening and giving us an update. Trent, did you have something real quick?
Yes, for our ODOT team. So I'm not usually the one who asks these questions, but just the context of history for C4, the STIP has traditionally been an area of funding that's been competitive for our, like a competitive source of funding for our rural communities that doesn't exist for the rest of the county. So I'm curious if this cycle of the STIP will have one of those competitive grant cycles and what that would look like.
I'm not aware of anything beyond what John has presented, and that's not to say that something else would come up. But as far as I'm aware, this is it.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, because you said STIP with a P at the end, yes?
That's correct. So if my understanding is, my memory is right, and it could be wrong, 100% could be wrong. The first cycle of STIP after the R1 Act was formed, the R1 Act was formed in theory to help guide sort of the competitive grant cycle process of the STIP. And then in 2017, that STIP was then, like that next 4 years of STIP was then sort of allocated by the legislature. And so here's the third round since the formation of the R1 Act. Will it be more like the legislative cycle where it's been like fully allocated by the legislature, or will it be like the first round, which has competitive grant cycles in it?
Yes. So the reason I wanted to just check on the acronym is that there is also the transit funding, the STIF funding that I think is very relevant to many communities throughout Clackamas. You're served, of course, by SMART, but there are also smaller rural providers. I know that in the region, we've been working with the county on a countywide transit plan. So that's the other discretionary grant funds. So when I went through the table earlier, those were some of the other funds, but they're the state flavor rather than the federal flavor. So yeah, the short answer that I've said at length is yes, within the STIP, within the 24-27 STIP, this $65 million is the only discretionary funds that we are aware of. Oh, excuse me, I'm misspeaking. There are active transportation funds. The acronym has been changing by about the month. This is the Pedestrian Bicycle Active Transportation Program. And Chris, I think I'm not
Probably an
aware
active
of
transportation. There's going to be a presentation on the ACT on Monday about it, and I am scrambling to get the ACT materials up. So if you're looking, especially if you're a Commissioner Savis, and like, where are they? They tell us they're all or nothing in terms of materials, so they can't go up till they're all ready. But check there next week if you don't have to join the ACT, but the presentation will be there. But I don't know if I would call that discretionary, but I would say that there's, you know, a good potential for input on those. But yeah, I think this is like a blend of the last two cycles, but a little bit more like the most recent one and less like the one before. So you will have our contact information, and we are happy to have conversations to take in input to come back to a future C4 and talk more in depth. We know you're literally the first to hear and get this presentation, and there'll be more of it. And we are happy to answer questions, help, and gather the information.
Great. Thank you both very, very much. And I know there's probably more to come in the future on this. Sorry, technical difficulties here. There we go. All right. Next on the agenda is the 2021 legislative update. And Mr. Lyons, there he is. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Evening, Mayor. How are you?
Doing well. You surviving the Marble Nut House?
Oh, well, from afar, yes. Hello, everybody. Want to give everybody some, I think it's been a few months, really, I think I last presented to you towards the beginning of session. And there's been a lot that's happened, so I want to set the stage a bit with some of the higher level background on session, and then get a bit more into the weeds on some Clackamas specific issues and bills. So for starters, you know, as we just alluded to, it's been a session like no other. It's been completely virtual. That's not going to change. It will be virtual through the end of the session and potentially the end of the year. And that's really made this whole process extremely difficult for legislators, for lobbyists, for the public, you know, to have access to the process. Similar to past years, there are thousands of bills. I think there's just about 2,500 bills this session. And as you can imagine, COVID and wildfires have been a major focus throughout the session. And here we are already into June. There's only about 3 weeks left of session. So we're really into the home stretch of what's left. And yet, still so much work to be done. This past Friday was a major legislative deadline. And you can kind of think of it as the last deadline for policy bills. With a few exceptions, if a bill did not pass a committee in its second chamber this past Friday, then it's dead, which is helpful in a lot of ways to kind of narrow the playing field a bit. But what that also means is over the next 3 weeks, everything now transitions over to the Ways and Means process, and that starts kicking in high gear. So the subcommittees are beginning to be assigned measures, and they are going to be meeting pretty much almost every day to get through all the incredible amount of work they have prior to sine die, which is scheduled for June 27th. And I imagine they'll go most of that way, if not to that day. A couple weeks ago, the May revenue forecast came out and showed significant more resources than were expected back in March, about $1 billion more per biennium through the 2025-2027 biennium. So the Ways and Means Committee has an immense amount of dollars to work with as they're looking at which policy bills that have costs associated with them will get funded. And then on top of that, as we all know, there's a lot of funding coming out of DC out to the states, and Oregon received $780 million through the American Rescue Plan. And the legislature set up a unique process where each legislator is getting anywhere from $2 to $4 million to earmark as they see fit using those dollars. So that's added just another interesting layer to this entire process. So with that context, getting into the Clackamas specific issues a little bit more, first I'll say we are so fortunate to have what's become a very active Clackamas Caucus, which has 15 members from throughout the county, and they've been meeting for months and working together in a bipartisan way, which is really great. And about a month or so ago, they, after working through their bylaws and other educational pieces and commitments to the caucus itself, they settled on what their priorities are for the 2021 session. and I know that many of you are involved in one or more of these. They are the County Courthouse project and securing the $94.5 million for that as the state match. The 205 project and making sure that it has fair and equitable funding to be able to be constructed. The Sunrise Gateway Corridor Community Visioning concept and getting $4 million for that to be advanced. And finally, passing the Willamette Falls Locks Public Corporation Bill, which I'm happy to report passed the Senate last week after having already passed the House. So it's now just about on its way to the governor's desk. So that's huge news to be able to ultimately get the locks transferred from the U.S. Army Corps over to this new entity in our quest to get them restored and reopened. So those are, the primary issues we've really been focusing on, in addition to wildfires and some other key issues specific to Clackamas County. For this group, I thought it would be helpful to just take a deep dive on 205 in particular and the transportation funding issues. I gave an update to C4 Metro last month about this, and since then there's been a lot more action. So without further ado, I'll give you a little bit of history here. And there is so much history with this that I'll try my best to keep it high level and try not to confuse you. But after I'm done, feel free to pepper me with any questions. So starting out back in March, Speaker Kotek took a strong interest in helping to address deficiencies that have presented themselves from the transportation package from 4 years ago, HB 2017. And, as we all know, there were things that didn't end up happening in that bill, like the 205 funding. And since then, we've learned other issues that have materialized, such as the issues related to tolling, the Rose Quarter, et cetera, et cetera. So legislators have known, more work is needed. And so she took the reins in putting together an amendment. And in March, there was a hearing on it with a number of different groups and governments presenting to the committee and sharing their thoughts. And right after that hearing, the speaker convened a number of different jurisdictions, including Clackamas County, in an effort to improve that amendment. And Co-Chair McLean and Representative Power were also part of that work. And, we county staff recognized pretty early on that there were a host of issues that would be part of that discussion relating to tolling and bottlenecks and funding. And so we developed a set of transportation values that we thought would be useful to help guide our position taking on so many of those things and ultimately on the bill. And we worked with our board, and that was adopted back mid-April. And like I said, touches on a host of issues relating to transportation funding on the interstate system. So that, I believe, may have been shared with you, but if not, we can certainly pass that along. It will serve us not just this legislative session, but into the future as well. And then about 3 weeks ago, a new version of that amendment came out based on all those conversations and changes that were made. And a couple more public hearings were held. And Clackamas County ultimately supported the bill alongside a number of other jurisdictions from the region, including Metro and Portland and Multnomah and Washington counties, Beaverton. I believe Wilsonville may have been on that list. There were many. But there were also some opponents still. The truckers, AAA, and AGC opposed for different reasons, taking issue with about one provision each in the amendment. And so that brings us to last week, when the Joint Transportation Committee, in its last meeting of prior to the legislative deadline, took a version of that amendment. They'd stripped out a couple provisions, and they put it into the Omnibus Transportation Bill, which is HB 3055. and they passed the bill in a vote of 9-3. And because of those changes they made to a couple of those provisions, the truckers, AAA, and AGC now strongly support the bill. So it's just been an interesting evolution. And I think at the end of the day, why most are supporting this bill, including Clackamas, is recognizing that the status quo under the transportation package from 4 years ago is just unacceptable. For 205 in particular, it has no money, and it will be completely reliant on the tolling revenues when and if that gets implemented years from now. And so with that, I wanted to share a few PowerPoint slides with you that were presented to the committee by ODOT that I think help to illustrate some of these issues that the legislature has been looking at. So this was their visualization of HB 2017 and what it would do today. In essence, there is money for the Rose Quarter and for Highway 217. And even the Rose Quarter doesn't have all of what it needs to move forward. And so what this amendment does, one thing it does, is it takes that penny of the gas tax that had been dedicated to the Rose Quarter and makes it flexible. Specifically, it will enable ODOT to spend it on a few key things that are named in this bill. And that is the 205 project, the Boone Bridge project, and also the Rose Quarter project still, and tolling implementation. And those 4 projects are named in the bill, specifically called out. And ODOT said on the record that if this bill were to pass, ODOT would be able to begin construction on phase 1 of I-205 in the spring of next year. And phase 1, just to clarify, is from 10th Street, West Lynn, to the east to Oregon 213, including the Abernathy Bridge. Phase 2, which will be a few years away still, is from 10th Street west to Stafford Road. And this is a nice visual showing how they would be breaking out the different projects and what the timelines look like. So as you can see, the orange being construction, Highway 217 is first up by a hair, and then shortly thereafter, the Abernathy Bridge phase 1 portion of 205 begins. You have the Rose Quarter that's, probably a couple years away. And then further out is phase 2 of 205, and even further out is the Boone Bridge. And this last slide I think is also helpful because it shows that how they would be using that penny, that flexible penny for the project. So it's done in a gradual way to ramp these projects up based on their readiness. So, in the case of 205, it's phase 1, it's pretty much ready to go. So it's going to get a good chunk of the dollars to move it to construction versus the Boone Bridge, which they haven't really even begun design yet. So that's going to require a smaller amount of money to get design underway, but it will provide that forward momentum so that ultimately the Boone Bridge will get to a point of construction. A couple other things the bill does. One thing we appreciated is that it is high level still, and the language is flexible, so that will allow ODOT to be nimble in their decision making on these projects as they continue to design them and better refine what the costs are of everything. ODOT will also remain in charge of the funding decisions of the tolling revenue, which was important to us. The bill also continues to specify that there is a dual purpose of tolling, and it's just like from 2017. It's to both manage congestion and to fund these highway improvements. And lastly, and this is an important addition beyond what was included in HB 2017, it specifies that revenues generated by tolling can be used for improvements both on the interstates as well as off the interstates on adjacent, connected, and parallel routes. So that's super important for all of our communities, who are going to see diversion as a result of these tolls, to be able to have funding for improvements on those local facilities to be able to address changing traffic patterns. So now having passed its policy committee, the bill heads over to the Ways and Means Committee. And at this point, I don't suspect we'll see any changes, although I know that there are still stakeholders out there that are interested in seeing some tweaks. But I think at this point, the big question is whether it can be changed and still have the votes necessary to pass it ultimately on the floors of the House and Senate. So that's, I would say that's it in a nutshell. And I would just encourage all of you, if you are willing to support, if you are supportive of the bill, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local legislators, make sure they're aware of your support and that you're asking for their vote, whether they're in the Ways and Means Committee or ultimately on the floor. It's unknown right now whether this bill will require a 3/5 majority on the floors, or whether there will be any changes that make it just a simple majority requirement. And so that those changes may affect some of the calculations behind how they move this bill forward. And I think we'll know that here in the next week or so. But regardless, important that all of our legislators are hearing from us. And one last thing I wanted to leave you with, switching over to the federal side, our federal delegation is also keenly aware of the needs on 205 and have been in touch with us, expressing their interest in supporting the project with potential federal funding as they are looking at potentially this infrastructure bill that could be quite large. They are curious to know what's happening at the state level and what federal funding could look like for 205. So as part of that, ODOT is putting forward an earmark request to our federal delegation. And what that specifically says is they are asking for $250 million for the project, but it's contingent on whether the federal infrastructure bill has some kind of program as part of it that is like a national and regional significance type projects. And it remains to be seen whether something like that would be included. But in support of that effort, the county has drafted a stakeholder letter, which we're circulating now. I believe all of you should have received it. We'd appreciate any of you to be on that and pass along your logos. And I think, one thing that is of interest to at least some of our members of our delegation is whether federal investment could change the dynamics around tolling on 205. ODOT's current plans are, as they're currently constructed, would implement tolling on 205 probably about 3 years earlier than the rest of the region. How they would be handling that, though, is the tolling on 205 is specifically to help pay for that project, versus the tolling in the region is for congestion management, not specifically for the revenue. And, we feel like that's completely unfair and inequitable. And, I think there's a feeling like if federal investment were made in 205, that might get ODOT the resources they need to preclude the need for that earlier tolling of 205, specifically for the revenue, which would be super helpful to us to then put us on par essentially with the rest of the region in this congestion management conversation, where we're just, where 205 and the Clackamas County community is not being told any earlier than the rest of the system. So again, would appreciate your support on that one, and I will leave it there and happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Savas.
I'm gonna be really delicate with what I say, but I feel an obligation just to state something here. And Commissioner Schrader's just joined us, so if she wants to add anything to this. But as long as we've had this before us, I know that this organization group has been seemingly, at least the last makeup when we last kind of talked about it, in opposition to tolling for a number of reasons. When we last spoke about it, we talked about the value statement that the board unanimously voted for, and Chris spoke to that, and you've seen a copy of that. On May 10th, in somewhat of an emergency type of meeting, because Speaker Kotek had asked for Clackamas County to chime in on this, the Board of County Commissioners met on a Monday evening, late afternoon, early evening, and decided to basically support the flexible penny, if you will, that verbiage, I guess, to get the project moving, but spoke against tolling. But so when you testify before the legislature, for those of you who have not before, you usually check one of the three boxes. You're either in support, you're neutral, or you're against, the particular bill you're speaking to. And Clackamas County checked the box to support, and Chair Smith spoke against tolling, but again, supported the flexible penny. It was a little bit of a challenging discussion. It was a 4-1 vote. I voted against it because I thought that we hadn't seen or really met the values or had any assurances that the values that we spoke about were met, nor did we have the inclusion of all of the jurisdictions and voices. So I felt an obligation to just raise that tonight and just let you know. I'm not at any means or any way trying to throw any of my colleagues under the bus, but I just felt it's more about an obligation to come clean with how Clackamas County pivoted to being against to be for, with those nuances. Thank you.
Councillor Heisey.
So I think the answer to this, Chris, is going to be yes, that is in the rulemaking, but I'll ask anyway, because I'm very curious about the development that the money can be used on adjacent and parallel routes and to basically to help address diversion. But this money is all continuing to be controlled by ODOT. So has there been any discussion of what the conversations will be like on how or when those funds might be allocated to these parallel routes, or any indication of how that will play out, and what conversations ODOT might have with cities around those sorts of areas of expenditure?
Yeah, I think it's just too early to say. I think what was important on this bill was making sure it was the language remained high level and didn't get into it wasn't overly prescriptive. I don't know if there will be a rulemaking per se, or if it will just be OTC decision making. But I think all of those answers are to come. And in the meantime, they're just trying to get this bill through with some of these more higher level pieces. There had been talk over the conversations of the amendment whether there should be carve outs of the money, set asides of different percentages for different purposes. And at the end of the day, I think there wasn't enough agreement on what that could look like. And I think most folks didn't want to tie ODOT's hands too much, where it would preclude them from being able to have that flexibility and nimbleness to be able to advance these projects for what they needed. So that's why I say our value statement, I think, will be useful to us for years to come, because all of those conversations are still ahead.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any comments or thoughts on the latest events regarding, was it House Bill 3055 and the congestion pricing, flexible pennies, etc. Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you. I just wondered, Chris, if you could give us just a quick snapshot of the main factors that made the trucking segment change their position. What were the values that attracted them?
It's interesting. I think it's a couple things. From what I understand, I think it was a gradual realization that, or I guess I should start out and say, the Rose Quarter is the truckers' primary objective. It has been since 2017 was developed. The problem with that project is that it doesn't have all the funding it needs for construction, even with that dedicated penny. And so what I think folks have come to realize is that tolling is going to be that future revenue generator to help provide the necessary funding for all of these projects, you know, down the road, so that they have what they need. But right now, tolling doesn't have the money it needs to be implemented. And so this bill will ensure that the tolling project can move forward, and that ultimately that it will generate that revenue to then fund the Rose Quarter. So it's that indirect impact that I think the truckers came to understand was needed to be able to move their priority project. There was also one other provision in an earlier version of the amendment. It was section 35 that was included in there for the purpose of specifying that when designing projects, ODOT needs to look at the future capacity needs of the interstate after tolling is implemented. And what that will look like. And I think there was a feeling among the truckers that that could, you know, significantly alter the Rose Quarter project, or perhaps even negate the need prematurely. And so that was one of those provisions that was stripped out of the final version before it was adopted in the bill last week. And so I think a combination of those two factors is probably what got them to yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Cook.
Yeah, Chris, I was curious, is there any parameters of how that diversion traffic dollars, is there a mileage piece of how far off 205 that can be extended to?
Not in this bill. That will be, I think, a question before the OTC at a later date.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions for Chris?
I have a quick question for this committee. Chris mentioned a letter that was going to go to the federal delegation. We've asked all the cities to sign on, including the county. Is that something that C4 as an agency would potentially be interested in signing on to as well? This is a body that can vote and do that type of logo addition. And so I want to put that out there for this group to consider maybe.
Is this the Abernathy letter, Trent?
Yes, I can bring up the draft, since this would be obviously the first time this group as a group is hearing about it. I've done a short notice, so it's kind of weird to ask in that way, but certainly it's an opportunity for C4 to consider it if you'd like to consider it as C4.
And I know you're going to pull it up. In a nutshell, it's basically the supporting of federal, as federal funds come available, or they look at the infrastructure bill, that the Abernathy Bridge be part of the federal infrastructure bill. Is that, if I'm remembering that, is that correct, Trent?
That's correct. Here it is. Maybe just for the benefit of everybody, I know it's kind of a busy trip here. I can just quickly read it. It's a little bit long, but we have some time here, I think. Again, because it's new, it might be good to do a quick read through. If that's do you agree? Yes or no? Read it.
Absolutely, go for it.
All right, it says we support federal infrastructure investments in the I-205 bottleneck project. We are requesting the Oregon Congressional Delegation's full support to prioritize federal funding to seismically retrofit and widen the I-205 Abernathy Bridge over the Willamette River. Acting today ensures this project of regional and national significance can begin construction as early as 2022 and potentially removes the need to explicitly toll the bridge to fund construction. The Abernathy Bridge is in need of vital seismic repairs and serves as a strategic link for freight transportation on the national interstate system, providing a wide array of economic benefits to Clackamas County, the region, the state of Oregon, and the nation as a whole. The proposed project will widen the I-205 Abernathy Bridge with an additional through lane in each direction, eliminating a freight bottleneck on the I-205 corridor. Serving both Oregon and Washington residents and businesses, I-205 is predominantly 6 lanes for most of its 37-mile length. However, its southernmost section, which includes the Abernathy Bridge, reduces to only 4 lanes, creating bottleneck congestion and peak hours for commuters and freight users. This project will provide enhanced freight mobility that will benefit the entire Northwest. I-205 connects advanced manufacturing, high-tech, forestry, agriculture, and distribution shipping businesses in Clackamas County, Portland, and the Willamette Valley with major import-export facilities such as the Port of Portland, the Portland International Airport, and the Port of Tacoma. That's a really long sentence. Improvements of the bottleneck at the I-205 Abernathy Bridge will benefit the businesses and employees who depend on the reliable movement of products to these freight facilities, who do their part to strengthen the economy of Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. Federal funding today can advance construction on the I-205 Abernathy Bridge and move the project to construction in early 22. We are counting on your support for a project that will strategically enhance regional seismic stability and provide significant benefits to local and regional commuters, economic development, and West Coast freight mobility. We urge you to support this project and thank you for your consideration of this request.
Trent, if you wouldn't mind taking that down and bringing up the full screen of everybody. Just I think for sake of conversation, again, I think the ask here from Trent is, you know, R1, or sorry, the C4 supporting this letter going forward and adding our logo to the list of cities that have signed on to this. I don't know if we want to do this just consensus head nod or if there wants to be a motion put forward to do so. Or not.
Well, if we need to make a motion, I need to make a motion that C4 support this letter.
All right.
I would second that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for that. So there's a first and a second on this piece. Are there any thoughts, questions, discussion items on this?
It's a no-brainer. Let's do it.
I can't think of a reason why not.
Okay.
I agree.
Well, I agree as well. And I guess if you, for those in favor, if you'll raise your hand in front of your screen, that'd be great. All right. Anyone opposed to it? Any abstentions? Okay. Looks like we will be adding our C4 logo to this letter as well. So great.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. For those cities, we'll still take individual logos if you are still working that out with your councils. So thanks for your consideration there. Several of you have already replied, so thank you for that.
Perfect. Anything else on a legislative update that we should know about, Chris?
I think that's it for now. We will keep you posted here in the last few weeks.
Let the firestorm begin. The mass bill voting begin. All right, Chris, thank you. Appreciate it. Next on the agenda is the retreat, C4 retreat discussion. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, C4. Yes, I've heard from you loud and clear. You'd like to have a C4 retreat. I'm working really hard to figure out the topics that can go in that direction. You've given me some early guidance on that, and I've met with county staff to preliminarily propose a few ideas. On page 5 of your packet, I do have a few topical things I just would love your feedback on to help me help you have a productive C4 retreat. The first one is sort of the format, and I guess really what I'm looking for here today is head nods or concerns. Just think of this, please, as a discussion where you can help give me and the executive committee guidance on how to help you. So the format that we've done in the past for the C4 retreat has been to do an overnight at the resort at the mountain. I think it's now called the Resort on Mount Hood. It's changed its names a few times. I could still be wrong, but we've all colloquially called it the Resort at the Mountain, just like the Safeco Field will always be Safeco Field, even if they name it to T-Mobile Field, things like that. So what we've done in the past is met on a Friday afternoon, stayed overnight on Friday, and worked into Saturday morning. I think because of COVID and because of the uncertainty that still exists with COVID, it's really hard for me to recommend that approach continue here in this year. But I'm recommending a hybrid approach and sort of looking for your head nods here that we still do a Friday to Saturday format, where on Friday we meet in the evening outside at a social gathering sort of event, perhaps at a winery or some sort of outdoor venue that allows this group to appreciate and use that time to socialize. That's really what the Friday has been used for at the retreat in the past. We might even be able to do like a keynote speaker for a dedicated topic if that's appropriate, where it's just one speaker, one microphone. We're not sharing a bunch of microphones. So trying to think in that direction where there is still an in-person element of the retreat and then transitioning to a Saturday, maybe just a morning, so that it's not so cumbersome on the eyes, a Saturday morning of Zoom meetings that kind of get into the weeds of the C4 topics. So it probably would not be as long or as extensive as historical retreats, but still a chance for this newer C4 group to have that socialized chance and then also get some of the work done that the retreat has historically provided opportunities for. And then probably, yeah, so in terms of format, with what we know now about COVID, and obviously things could change, that'll make it harder, but is that generally a format that this group would be in favor of? Thumbs, head nods. Is that a question, Mayor Drinkwine, or just a kind of a thumbs up? Okay, good. All right, thank you for that. Dates. We're looking right now just to make sure that we have time to put some good information together at either September or October. Again, thinking that for some outdoor time. I know everyone's got plans for July and August. So want to appreciate that, and that gives us a little bit of time to put some good content together. So thinking September or October, near maybe one of the first 2 weekends of either Saturday or that September or one of those first 2 weekends in October. I'll do a doodle poll if that's okay with everybody, but in general, are those 4 weekends, pretty open or a good time frame to send out for a doodle poll, or should we look at a different timeline? Thumbs up, head nods. And haws. Okay, great, thanks. I'll do that doodle poll early next week and get that feedback. And then for topics, this group has, and this is where I could use a little bit more communication from you. I've heard pretty loud and clear that the 2 primary topics this group wants to discuss are number 1, transit, and number 2, disaster preparedness. And so here's where I have the benefit of my staff team has gotten together with me to provide some ideas for how this conversations could go. Regarding transit, there have been, I think, a lot of conversations and a lot of work on transit and transit opportunities and transit discussions over the last couple of years, but also we have a pretty new group. And so trying to find a way to balance continuing to move forward with also making sure that everybody's working on the same playbook or from the same playbook. And so perhaps some balance of education with some coordination and consensus on improving the transit in Clackamas County. I know that's a goal and priority for everybody here. And so we talked about one potential topic being some sort of education or some level of education, but then having some conversation around next steps as it relates to the transit development plan, which the county has just finalized. And so you've already had a presentation or 2 on the transit development plan. But that includes a few action items that this group could discuss and rally behind some of those in terms of taking some steps forward. So that's one area of opportunity. And the other one is discussing plans on how to coordinate towards addressing what our group has called transit gaps. And in particular, 2 primary hot topics that we often talk about. One of those gaps is the I-205, stretch between the Clackamas Town Center and Wilsonville/Tualatin area. Know that there's some improvements in that lane, but still some opportunities and desire by this group to find ways to level up there, especially if tolling is going to be real on I-205. knowing that there aren't a lot of alternatives to get away from that toll. The other gap that we've heard some growing consensus around is the town center out to Sandy. So kind of along the 212 corridor and meeting the needs of that, that sort of commute. And so those are the two conversations that would fall under that, addressing transit gaps. So that's the transit opportunities that we have there. So that's the next steps for the transit development plan, as well as addressing those transit gaps. And then for quickly, the disaster preparedness side of things, that could really go a lot of different ways. And so really would love feedback from this group here, but I think that there are some good opportunities is coordination around the emergency operations plans that everybody here has to adopt. And having gone through 2 recent disasters, natural disasters in the last year, plus the COVID natural disaster, public health disaster, is this an opportunity to kind of have a very policy level conversation around lessons learned, opportunities, overlaps, things like that? There's one area. Another area, and this is a result of these particular 2 disasters, is a conversation around coordination of debris management. That's been an issue for, I think, almost every jurisdiction here, including Clackamas County. And so there are some coordination needs and maybe even some policy needs or hurdles related to debris management. Now, those are traditionally, not transportation topics. This group is transportation heavy usually, but this group is also focused on land use, which some of these can fit in that category. And this group is called the Coordinating Committee. So you're not necessarily tied to just land use and transportation topics. You can be focused on ways to coordinate better, and disaster preparedness helps from that. So I'm going to stop talking. There are 4 questions at the end of page 5. And really what I want to hear from you is, do you want to have a talking retreat or an interactive retreat? Do you want to have education-based conversations or, directive-based conversations? Do you want to use the retreat as a way to solve existing problems or a way to set up conversations for your next C4 year and tackle some of these things more like dominoes and one piece at a time? And there it is.
Thanks, Trent. I appreciate that. So basically, again, hearing from Trent that he's willing to work to put together what we want to do. So what do we want to do? Mayor Stemple.
Great work, Trent. I was fearful of how we were going to discuss this, the retreat. Since it's such a short day on Saturday, I don't think that we're going to have an opportunity to really hash a lot out. So I think your domino idea of where we're going to set up our conversations for the next year is probably the best bet. I wish that we could do disaster preparedness sooner rather than later, but I understand, we have limited meetings, but I think we need to start talking about that right away.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Heisey.
Clarifying question. Are you asking us to choose between those 2 topics, or are you suggesting we could sort of visit both of them, Trent?
I'm looking for your direction to make this retreat into whatever you'd like it to be. If you'd like to try to do both, we will make both happen in some way and do the best that we can. If you think that it would be more fruitful to just do one of those, you can do that. If we want to do disaster preparedness sooner, we have July and August in advance of the retreat, potentially to start some of those conversations. The world is our oyster. We can make whatever we want from it.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, just a morning on Saturday will not be adequate to explore both of those, but I do think both of them are important. And, I would hate to miss out on the opportunity to talk about transit and to really think about those gaps. And I would even hope that maybe we could work something in there, just because every single community struggles with those final mile questions. If that transit piece could, in addition to looking at those 2 specific gaps, touch on that final mile question and kind of build us up toward solutions, that would be really helpful. So maybe your suggestion to start running with some disaster preparedness in the near term, and then kind of roll up into a retreat in September or October and have maybe enough time by doing something like that to cover both. I don't know. They're both really important. I don't want to pick between the two of them.
Mr. Brashear.
Yeah, I would just, being a transit person myself, I would just throw it out there for consideration that the two topics that we are discussing or at least thinking about discussing are not mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is, you know, having lived through Hurricane Katrina, the transit part of it, meaning the transit buses, the drivers, and all of the resources that come along with having a viable transit operation, were pivotal in moving people out of harm's way. And so as we talk about, as Commissioner Sabas likes to refer to, the transit deserts that exist in Clackamas County, we cannot have an intelligent conversation about disaster preparedness without talking about how we're going to move people that don't have the means to move themselves. And the only way we can do that is to pool our transit resources. Clackamas County has a number of transit providers, SMART being one of them, but there are others. And maybe individually we are small, but collectively we are large. And so I would challenge the group to think in terms of transit being part of and a major part of the disaster plan as we move forward. So I just throw that out there for discussion.
Thanks, Dwight. I appreciate that. Councilor Sherman.
Thank you. I think, Mayor Smith and Chad, I think, had a really salient point that, virtual meetings, at least I found that virtual meetings are really good for one-to-one conversations, one-to-many conversations. They're not great for many-to-many conversations. And so the notion of kind of more of a collaborative sharing of information isn't optimal in this type of format. And I think Councilor Lewis also kind of threw out the idea of maybe getting together for some kind of information sharing on that earlier evening. So I think both of those points are reasonable points as we kind of look at formulating this. I guess I would throw out there, as a fully vaccinated individual, we're looking at September, October. High probability the state of Oregon will be at 75, 80% plus fully vaccinated by then, if not more. I'm comfortable getting together. So, but I know from a liability perspective and, you don't want to have a super spreader event, things like that. So I will be fully supportive of whatever decision we make as far as our format, but I'm open to either. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor. Trent, just to kind of piggyback on Councilor Sherman's comments there. I mean, I agree with this format that we do. This is, we're not, we've been very well behaved as a group over the year that we've been doing C4 via Zoom. There's not been a lot of over talking and a lot of, I guess our usual, historically, this group tends to be a bit vociferous in our dialogue, and that just could be the change up of players. Who knows? But I will just say that I have noticed that, to Brett's comments, that a smaller Zoom group tends to have more dialogue and more exchange. So is the reason that we're looking at not getting together live a liability piece? Because I would rather be in person than via Zoom on these two particular topics. I think these are very important pieces to hash out via in person. And getting back to that, I know it's still several months away, but so a clarifier on that, Trent, might be helpful for the group, or at least for me.
Yeah, quick answer there is that I can only plan with what I know now. And there's so much that I don't know. Everything, as y'all know, changes month to month. And it could be as simple as a new strain comes, changes the way that we do things, vaccine does this or that. I don't know. And so, what would be easier to do is to over plan for perhaps a 2-day sort of in person, if we can find the right venue for something like that, that is open, is aerated, things like that. And then if we have to come back to a Zoom meeting, that's going to be much easier to set up than, find out in late August, hey, everybody's good to go, shake hands again and hug. It'll be harder to find a venue at that point. So I could probably over plan now and come back to the Zoom meeting if things change. I have not checked with our liability office here at the county on that. Probably my initial concern is that it's hard to project when we'll start coming back. And I'm in charge of me, and I'm not in charge of the other staff who'd be supporting those meetings. And so it's just really hard to confirm who would be comfortable and who would be available. But as you're saying, it's multiple months away. A lot of things could change in both directions.
Well, and we are Clackamas County, and I'm sure there's pockets somewhere that we could probably get together and no one will tell anyone that we did that. So, oh, did I say that out loud? Sorry.
Everything I write is in public record, by the way.
Well, we are recording. Okay. That's okay. I've been in trouble before for that stuff. All right. So, Councilor Sherman, did you have something else to add? Nope. Okay. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah. If there is interest in actually being live on Friday and having an opportunity to socialize afterwards, I do know that from past C4 retreats that Friday evening, we like to indulge with our favorite beverage. I would want to make sure that everyone felt comfortable doing that, and driving home intoxicated is always at risk. And I always felt that we had a lot more relaxation knowing that if there was lodging, let's say, then it always made it safer and better for everyone. So, and with everyone's safety in mind, I'm more optimistic we're going to be back to normal. I know that's a risk, but I am optimistic that we perhaps could be in a far better position in October or September. So I don't want to, if there is interest in that, I think we need to factor that in our decision. So I would support that as well, but I also support, the overnight lodging aspect to it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mayor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Hodson. I wanted to also say that I think the overnight lodging would be a good idea if we go to the trouble to arrange this and meet. I think we could have a backup plan of maybe those breakout Zoom rooms so that we could have some smaller groups and in-depth conversations. And the topics that I also think the transit and disaster preparedness are really linked. And to make it even a longer list, yes, I like the debris management. And I wanted to add one that we've also brought up in this group, which is some thinking toward a way to address the power outages. Is there a generator checkout methodology? Can Dwight's team of transit people bring generators out? Various things like that. We need to transport people. We need to get people power, and we need to get the debris managed. So those are some things that maybe could be addressed in small groups to at least get us started so we can make further progress. Those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Mayor. Commissioner Lewis.
Great, thanks. As a point of reference, we're talking about opening the Keller Auditorium the last week of August. So if we can have people see some shows, my hope is we can get together, particularly if we are in someplace beautiful in Clackamas County where we won't be afraid to spend some time outside with good airflow. So I would love to get together with y'all. And it would also be good to talk about how some of the emergency shelter work that we do year round to take care of vulnerable people is part of our resiliency and disaster management, and the connections there are pretty natural as well. So to kind of add a second sub bullet point under disaster management.
Yeah, Commissioner Lewis, I appreciate that. Because I think we run into, when we talk about the disaster piece. I think disaster is a broad word, I think, these days. We get a cold snap, and like we did in February, in January, where it's cold, but it's not weather disaster necessarily. How do we support our communities doing warming shelters or overnight kinds of pieces and things? And I get it, like in Canby, we put all of those things on hold this past year because of COVID. And how do you separate and create that separation? And we had a couple of churches that in the past had been those warming shelters or those overnight places for seniors to get heat. And we were, many of those were at a third of the capacity because of the social distancing piece. So as we ebb out of that and look at it coming in the year ahead and the next winter and those kinds of things, I think it's worthwhile conversation of how county and how the county and the cities can work together to make sure that we have those pieces in place. Those situations arise, not just for fires or power outages, but just in those situations as well. So that would be a good conversation. And it very well could be a short conversation. I don't know. At least ideas on what everyone's doing and or what resources are out there from the county to support those. Great, thank you. Other thoughts? So I'm hearing more, we definitely want more of a talking retreat than we do just a big data dump information piece. I think it sounds like we've added a few other topics to maybe for consideration there, Trent. Rick, sorry, I didn't see the hand there. Go for it.
Yeah, it was late coming up, but the CPOs and Hamlets, the community's leaders are having a meeting, and we're going to be discussing the emergency operation plan. And I know that that's part of a policy session coming up with the commissioners in June. So maybe that's something where at some point in time, they're going to get the partnering agencies involved, where maybe the possibility of putting a panel together of the fire, all the police, anything that had to do that, and actually get those questions out. Because if in fact the county has been working on the emergency operation plan and telling, okay, here's what really worked, here's what didn't work, and some of those things where we can get that information out and discuss those things, like, we kind of talked about it earlier, because what happened over in the Stafford Hamlet area, I wasn't affected other than by smoke and some of the traffic pieces, but it was far more severe on the other side of the river. So if we could get a panel together with those questions might be able to be asked and answered by that panel, would be a possibility.
That's not a bad idea, Rick.
Yeah, and I'll just add, it's hard to see their name in here, but your fire member, Matt Silva, is monitoring this meeting somehow. It's still unclear to me how, but he's in here, and he's excited about some of these topics and said that he'd be willing to help put some of the stuff together as it relates to some of the disaster preparedness stuff. So.
In the chat box, evacuation routes could be another helpful breakout topic, Trent. That was from Martin.
That's great, and that kind of fits that transportation niche that C4 has kind of hit on. And I know that the region has done a lot of work around emergency transportation routes, but certainly that extends beyond the metro boundary into other needs that we saw on 224 coming out of Estacada back in September.
Yep.
For example.
Make sure that Mayor Drinkwine's on that panel. And did some amazing things in Estacada during that time. So for sure. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I just want to add, maybe we should do is just take a note of all these things and put together a ranking. And Trent, I'm just throwing this out there. Maybe we can rank these, and because I think that we need to make sure we have, if let's just say transit ranks way up at the top, and there's interest in having a good dialogue about that, I want to make sure we have time allowed to do that. And the more things we put on the plate, so to speak, the less time we'll have altogether. So I'm just kind of wondering how we manage that.
I mean, I feel like these conversations are a great reminder that C4 has a lot of work that it can be doing and a lot of opportunities to coordinate. And we have the retreat, but we also have these monthly meetings. And, you know, this is great information for the executive committee to have to prioritize a lot of this information. And so, yeah, I think I'm encouraged by the amount of feedback that we're getting, because I think that there's a lot of energy around what this group wants to work on. And I think that's really, really exciting. And that's fun policy stuff to dig into for me as a staff person, but also I think for many of you as policymakers, because it means there are policy gaps and policy opportunities. And so we can create those opportunities to improve on those and move Clackamas County and its group forward.
Yeah, as a member of the executive committee, this is something we always wrangle with, is trying to make sure we meet the desires of the membership, all of you. And I'm just kind of wondering if maybe on the disaster or the panel, if you will, of how we handle these things, if maybe that's something we could possibly do just dedicate one C4 retreat evening to that and the discussion to give it some value as an option, or any of those topics that we could do, you know, one and just commit an entire C4 meeting between now and, you know, September or the end of the year, or any of these, and manage some of those interesting topics that way as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, Trent, I'm just in the chat here. Councilor Sherman threw out the idea of just getting education information out to us prior to the retreat, so that we can do some of our homework on our own before coming into that, so we come in prepared. And then that was seconded by Councilor Pratt as well. Again, it's not a reminder, well, I'll say it is a reminder too of what our charge as C4, as a coordinating committee. The big buckets that we've always set out to tackle have been transportation and land use. And so I think this is a twofold piece. Maybe Trent, for the exec committee meeting coming up, maybe, you know, every year when we've done a retreat, we've created somewhat of a work plan. So maybe the exec committee can look at what that work plan was, you know, we'll say roughly 2 years ago. I know we kind of created one, kind of an ad hoc one last year with COVID, but what did that look like, and what have we tackled or moved ahead on and accomplished? And then along that vein as well is something that could be a meeting topic for us coming up in this setting or the retreat was, you know, housing. There's not been a lot of conversation on housing development, the Metro bond and how that's playing out in Clackamas County, or how that's going to look like. So that, I don't know if that's a conversation, a talking portion of the retreat, as much as maybe an information, maybe it's both. So I would throw that out there, as well as, you know, as a potential piece to discuss or add into our work plan that we come out of that retreat looking at, to make sure that we keep those pieces front of mind as we work forward on those two buckets. Councilor Heisey again.
All of what you just said made a lot of sense, and I was actually just going to chime in briefly with a reflection back that the retreat that we did, where we really focused on housing in depth, I thought was very good, and it did provide a lot of information, and it also it challenged us to really set some goals collectively, and so I appreciate you bringing that up again, Brian, that we haven't talked about housing a lot of late at C4, because I do think that's still really critical work. But as a model for how to do a retreat, I felt like staff really nailed it in the way that went. And I wonder, I think there's a lot of excitement and a lot of fear and a lot of questions. At least I have a lot of questions around the more of the disaster preparedness and that kind of field. So I almost wonder if that's a place where where executive committee needs to do some deep thinking and give us some guardrails a little bit. I think the region as a whole is terrified after what we've been through this past year, and for good reason. But having a conversation that's kind of sprawling around that, I don't think is going to do a lot to alleviate our fears or build us in a specific direction that results in some good goal setting around, okay, these are things we need to develop as tools or resources, or this is information we need. So I'm kind of giving you conflicting feedback here in some ways, but I think more information, yes, and we've heard that from lots of other people, but also think about how to shape that information and how much information on some of these topics. There, I almost brought it back around.
Thank you for that. I'll jump in looking at the time and noticing that we're starting to lose a couple members, that I feel like I have some pretty good direction and can touch base with the executive committee. It's not actually this Monday, it's the Monday after. It's a weird month, but we'll touch base on that. I'll send out a doodle poll for those weekends. I'm hearing a desire by the group mostly to aim for an in-person retreat and potentially an overnight retreat. So I will look at what options are out there. We'll see if the resort at the mountain still has that availability for us to jump in there. Yeah, interesting times ahead. So thanks for that feedback. That's really, really helpful. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Trent. Thank you, everyone. That was good. Appreciate it. Moving into updates and other business, real quick, Jpac update.
Councilor Heisen.
Yeah, super quick. I have to flip back. We did a lot of talking about policy, the federal policy on transportation. I'm not going to go into it in any great depth. We also talked about RAFA, which we discussed at C4 Metro the day before. So mostly it was just reporting out on what we had discussed and giving feedback that the RAFA stuff was in good shape, and that economic evaluation was something that the group had discussed as being important. And so I passed that along and said, let's also make sure that we think about how it's measured and make sure it doesn't impede investment in some of the stuff that we've all worked hard to develop. So that's the 30-second overview.
Perfect. Thank you. MPAC update.
So I would just mention that the last conversation included information from Beaverton, King City, Wilsonville, and Hillsborough about UGB expansion areas. And then, of course, there was a presentation concerning congestion pricing update. And I don't know if Ed and Christine probably have more to add at that, so I would defer to them at this point.
Well, Martha, I felt like we were getting a great lecture, but no one was really asking for any opinions at the last MPAC meeting. I had many disagreements with the conclusions that the panel had reached on congestion pricing, but I'm afraid it's something that's going to be shoved down our throats whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I think it's a big piece there. Commissioner Lewis, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess at the last MPAC meeting, to be very fair, we were running far behind time. So in terms of not getting a chance for feedback, that was not by design. We should have had over 40 minutes for that. And every single one of the previous presenters took more than their amount of time. So I guess to be clear, the idea there was that we were going to hear some of the high level results of the congestion pricing study, which is looking at some of the different typographies of pricing mechanisms. And frankly, I think the study has done a really good job of pointing out diversion as a serious issue. And ODOT had not been talking about diversion as a serious issue until our findings came back. So to the extent that the tool has started to move dialogue in a productive way for us, I will stand by that work. And I will try and figure out if there's a time that we can actually have more conversation at MPAC. We've got packed agendas for the next 2 months, but we should revisit it.
Well, Commissioner Lewis, let's reel that group in now. Come on. Okay. APRA City County Coordination. Trent.
Yes, I struggle with typing this acronym. As you can see right here, it should be the American Rescue Plan Act, not the American Plan Rescue Act. Would be the appropriate acronym there. But City County Coordination. So the state and local relief fund from the American Rescue Plan Act does doled out a bunch of money to cities and the county to respond to the public health pandemic that we now know as COVID-19. It sets out a bunch of different ways to use the money, and there has been a desire by some and an interest in even by some of the folks at the county to figure out what city-county coordination looks like. There was a presentation at the Board of County Commissioners just this last Tuesday, June 1st, about where everything stands with that money. Clackamas County will receive a total of $81 million. I know the cities are receiving a variety of millions of dollars too, depending on the size of the cities. The money's going to come in 2 tranches. And so the money that was released just recently will just be half of what everybody gets. And then the other half will come no less than or no sooner than 12 months from now, which is a really, really strange way to time something, but that's what they do in DC, I guess. But I think there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out ways to leverage dollars to make projects bigger or move some of the bigger projects. And so that's where we've been hearing a desire for more coordination. And so I know that the city finance managers or directors or whatever the title is for each of your folks are going to meet with our finance director next week to sort of initiate some of those initial discussions around city-county coordination. It's unclear to me what that's going to look like, but I wanted to give this group an FYI or a heads up that at least at the staff level, some of those discussions are starting. I would also, it's a weird balance, but I would say that there is time, and that's always a weird thing to say when you're in the middle or near the end of a pandemic, and who knows if we're actually quote unquote near the end, but it doesn't feel like there's time because we're trying to solve a crisis and an emergency. At the same time, no pun intended, at the same time, the guidance from the U.S. Treasury is not final yet. What's out there right now is just interim, it's draft, it's open for comments. There's a lot of opportunities to clarify that information. And so it's a lot of money to be on the hook for if you use it wrong, and that impacts everybody's general fund. And so as urgent as everybody wants to be, and I think there's merit in that urgency to get that money out to those needed communities or businesses or however you plan to spend it. I also, we're recommending a cautious approach and a thoughtful approach. And if opportunity merits it, a coordinated approach. So this group being a policy body for coordination, just wanted to give you all the heads up that at least at the staff level, some of those coordination discussions are starting. I think there will be opportunities that we learn about from the state legislature in terms of what projects get funded. And so there's another good opportunity there to see what projects are moving. That might tick a few things off the list that could use some of those urgent funding needs and open up those dollars that you're planning for into other areas or other avenues. But this is more of an FYI at this point. If there's an opportunity for more policy level coordination, I just want you to know that the county is thinking of this group as an area where that can potentially happen.
Okay. Thank you, Trent. All right. Any other last minute tidbits? Going once, twice? Sold. Everyone, thank you for the great dialogue this evening. I really appreciate it. And it was really good to see everyone. See you next month.
Yes.
Stakeholder List this week, okay?
I just wanted to add thank you for allowing me to be a bit late. I do have company here from the coast. And I had to attend to that, but I am reading everything. I'm up to speed. And Paul and I are joined at the hip with most policy issues. So thank you, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you.
Bye-bye.